Welcome to the HReSource podcast, a series designed specifically for business owners and executives who want to better understand people to increase productivity and performance. In this latest HReSource broadcast, we meet the amazing Downie OBE. He's had a stellar career and is one of the country's, if not the world's, leading sports performance consultants. In this conversation, we talk to Grant about his life, his career, and also make the marriage and connection between elite sport and elite sport management and the impact such techniques, knowledge, and insights can have on our day-to-day working and managing our own businesses. So we look at things like crisis management, leadership, physical fitness, of which Grant takes a much broader view of, and it's very interesting to look at the well-being element of his insights, what he understands about elite sports and how that should be translated into the commercial world, how we might repurpose or rethink our career path in the light of age, events, circumstance, or even time for reflection. Think about that right now. And also we've got consistency, or that marginal gains element, which we talk about in the title. What does that bring? Well, again, very interesting view on that from Grant. I urge you, take the time to listen to this. You'll learn a great deal. Enjoy.
Well, I'm delighted to welcome to today's podcast somebody that I've known personally who has helped me immensely at one stage of my running career, as short as it was, and has an enormous amount of experience in an area that actually can lend itself to the commercial world in a rather unique way. I'm delighted to welcome Grant Downie.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure
Now,
to be here.
one of my first questions with a lot of these podcasts that we've been running, we're in a new series now, but I think the question is still relevant, unfortunately, about lockdown. I think there might be some people who maybe want to, just to sort of allude to this, to hint at this, might be a little bit jealous about the outlook you have, literally, from your location, your normal location, I should say, because you're recording at the moment from a different location, but your normal location. So how has lockdown been for Grant?
Do you know, lockdown affects everyone, and I think we shouldn't get away from the fact that everyone is affected, and I think, you know, we're all in that same storm, but we all have a different boat, and I think it's how you deal with your boat. And I'm in a fortunate stage of my life. You know, if I don't ever work again, I survive very well, you know, so therefore let's not be blasé about it. There's some people struggling to put food on the table, so let's not think it's wonderful. Lockdown isn't wonderful. Lockdown, people are dying, but I'm fortunate that 18 months ago, for a number of years, I've had a sort of dream of mine to build a house and live on a place called the Isle of Arran, which is a place my parents took me to from a very young age. My grandparents visited. And so I live on the Isle of Arran, and it's a location of 5,000 people. You know, we've got lots of space, so having freedom to do nice walks is wonderful. However, there's a boat go 6 times a day, but you can't get on it. So believe it or not, you feel a little bit trapped at times too, because you see a boat coming in and you're not allowed to go on it unless there's a medical emergency or there's a need for care or there's a rightful need, because obviously they're trying to contain the pandemic. So from that perspective, you know, I have beautiful walks, I have beautiful outside life, but, you know, but I don't have the choice. And I think human beings like choice. You know, we like to be able to decide, and that's what a lot of us struggle with. And I haven't struggled at all, but I haven't had the freedom to, for example, you know, 2019, I probably visited 5 continents of the world with my job. This year, in the last year, I've done none, which, you know, but if that's a consequence, it's not a major consequence for me.
So how have you been keeping busy?
I'm very fortunate because we have mediums like this, and much of the work I do as a troubleshooting person, you know, I think what he has proved, and I've said this to a number of the companies I work for, you know, you pay me a very healthy daily rate. You don't have to do that anymore. You can pay me for a 3-hour, you know, Zoom consultation. It saves you flight, it serves carbon footprint, and you're playing for half a day rather than a full day. So I've been, you know, my work initially dipped and then has come back, and at the moment I'm turning work down because the stuff I don't want to do. But a lot of my work is actually almost, as I call it, being a critical friend. In business, you would maybe call it a non-executive director, of looking at performance services and how they can improve. And it's not to, what's the right word, just go in and say, this person's not very good at what they're doing. It's actually trying to recognize where that person is on their journey and what is their development plan, both personally and professionally, to maximize the benefit for themselves and the company. And there's a synergy between the two, because so many companies have, shall we say, great mission statements, great values, but do they daily practice them?
Is it lived through in the
Absolutely.
company? Is it the experience of the members of staff to think,
exactly,
I recognise that vision?
Exactly. And I think, as I often say to them, if I drop in from Mars for a day, what do I see? You know, so if people say, you know, we're an all-inclusive company, but I actually go into the office and I just see, you know, 50 white males sitting at the desk, it's fairly obviously not the case. You know, and what do we mean by that? And do we really mean it? And do we know how to achieve it? And how are we going to achieve it? And are we going to support people to achieve it? And I think if you think of a sporting field, you know, it is probably one of the most equal employment fields, because you see people from every ethnic background. You see the fact that we now have the women's game being highlighted as a fantastic example for women's health. You know, it's not a product that's going to financially make direct money, but it could, if very successful in Britain, probably save our NHS millions of billions of pounds, because less obesity, less diabetes, more young girls playing sport for the love of it, and some of them making a career of it. And I can only think it's a good thing.
And it's filtering its way through now as some of the better known players, because it's been emerging for a little while now, and now starting to take punditry roles and appearing on TV.
Well, exactly.
Another and commentating on games, which is again.
Well, you know. I remember recently I did well, 5 years ago when the women's game started in Manchester City. I was asked to do a feature on it, and I remember Googling just to get a picture of Steph Horton, and I went through Google, and I think I found her name at about, I don't know, 50th on the list of Steph. If you Google her name now, I think she's in the top 3.
I had the pleasure, this is name dropping, I had the pleasure of meeting Steph in an awards ceremony with the Northern Echo round I think it's every year they've been running. I think they had to do it virtually this year, like everybody else. What a wonderful woman. I mean, absolutely. With her own challenges, but has really proven to be a fantastic ambassador for the sport.
Well, I think there's many good ones. Steph is outstanding and deserves everything she achieves. And the other person who again is from the northeast who sums that sort of ethos up is Jill Scott. And I remember recently speaking to a group of primary school children, and I love speaking to primary school children because they're the future, and we forget, and it's lovely. And I got asked a question from a young boy, who's your favourite footballer you've ever worked with? And so I thought I'll throw that back to them. And I said, well, forget Rangers, forget Middlesbrough, because they're 6. They only know Manchester City, Manchester United, and everyone. They went, oh, you've got 5 guesses, and they went the usual: Joe Hart, Sergio Aguero, Vincent Kompany, David Silva, Phil Ford. And I went, no, it's Jill Scott.
Yeah.
And again, the unconscious bias of the world just thinks of male footballers. Now, Jill Scott is one of the best human beings I've ever worked with. She exudes enthusiasm, dedication, but fun. Yeah. And that's what sport's meant to be. And I think us, particularly males, have to get away from this idea of football is for men. It is not.
I tell you what, I wouldn't want to go into a tackle with Jill Scott.
No, you would. No, you come out worse, I promise.
Absolutely guaranteed. She's one hell of a player. The other one, saw on the subject, Lucy Bronze.
Yes.
Is she from Blythe?
She's from she's just from South Newcastle. Yes.
She's a fabulous player. I mean, and what she's done with her career in terms of the Champions League, and to win the
Ballon d'Or. Exactly. And I think we should be celebrating that as first of all a footballer who happens to be a woman, not a woman footballer. There's a difference. Yeah. And I think it's, that his achievement goes alongside the likes of Pele, those sort of people, Maradona, more laterally Cristiano Ronaldo, or Messi. But actually, Lucy Bronze is their equal. So why aren't we celebrating that more?
Yeah, and she's so. And I saw her at the awards ceremony as well, but on the camera pitch, she was so modest. So I was like embarrassed.
Well, I think if you think of the women's game, naturally they've had a different profile, and I think this is and what will be interesting. I remember when the women's game became professional, it was some joyous sights when I used to see some of the players coming in on their bikes because they couldn't afford cars. Now they have gone up a level where they are actually affording new cars, which is nice. But actually, where we'll be careful when the younger generation comes through, there'll be an entitlement syndrome, I expect. And that's where the game will be interesting, because it'll hit a point where it's not necessarily making direct money, but it is making a lot of money through good advertising and the future products. But it'll be interesting, how far can it go? And I remember having a discussion with Steph and Jill about this when we were looking at the support system we put into Manchester City's women's team to the men's first team. And they were rightfully turned around to me and said, it's interesting, Grant, the men have, let's say, 5 physiotherapists, we have 2. Do you not think it should be the same? And I went, well, you could argue from a duty of care it could be, but if I tell you the men generate £500 million for the club and you generate a £5 million loss, would you stock it the same way? And actually, if I cut your heads off, which I would never do, because you're people and that's priceless, but your asset value for the company. And that's what sometimes, as football fans watch the game, forget from a business perspective where I work from. I'm dealing with injured players, which means commodity has suddenly gone from 50 million to nothing. How do you get that 50 million back? Well, how do you invest in that? And so it's understanding. I can have the emotional hat of a fan on, but I rarely do. I actually have the cool blue thinking, but I also have a contained, excited personality that wants to see people do well. But actually, I've got to come back to a process.
It's got to make sense, hasn't it? It's got to make sense.
Exactly.
Just for the purpose of explanation, we've sort of launched into things, but I think it might just take a little pause for a couple of things that we could do. One is just to give an outline to the audience as to your career. Actually, very sort of snapshot view through as to how you've arrived at this opportunity to be able to. I wouldn't call it retirement, but you're living a different lifestyle now.
Exactly.
And your career has afforded you that opportunity, which has always been a dream of yours. So how did you manage to achieve that dream?
I think, again, was it a straight line? Was it all success? Of course it wasn't. Was I sacked once? No, twice. So you go through a journey, and I think what you've got to do as a person is have a dream. I'm a great believer in a dream. Martin Luther King said best, he had a dream, and look what he went out and achieved. And I think, but again, we've got to have something personal. And I'm a physiotherapist by profession. I love treating people who got injured. I don't really see the injury as important as the person. And the two are very connected. And I think that helped me in my leadership journey, because I've worked for 3 main professional football teams: Glasgow Rangers, Middlesbrough, Manchester City. I've worked for the English Football Association. Now in my consultative role, I work for the City Football Group still. I work for the Scottish Football Association, the Premier League, and a few other people. I mentor a number of people privately. But my ambition was always to help people be the best version of themselves. And I think that, to me, that's what leadership's about. And to do that, you have to understand yourself. And so have I gone to university and studied leadership? No, I've not. I've done a lot of good informal learning about leadership, done a lot of online courses, but most importantly, I've worked with some outstanding leaders. And I think when you see that, what you try and do is pick little bits from them, but ultimately be authentic to yourself. You can't be someone else. There's people out there who do things much better than I'll ever do. I'm very relaxed about that. My job is to befriend them and then help me. They don't threaten me one bit. They actually make me realize who I am more. So my journey has taken me from football clubs that have won trophies, got relegated, competed in Europe, worked at Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games. So seen a fair bit of, of things and had personal battles in that too. I've been married, I've been separated, lost contact with children. Life's not, and so we often point to the end bit, which looks fantastic, but we don't necessarily recognize the journey. And that's not always been pleasant, but that maybe shapes you. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I'd never regret anything I've done. I maybe regretted a few things I didn't have the courage to do.
I often think in my experience of management and very different career, different trajectory, some of those experiences, and certainly family, you draw on experience of family in business because of the way you deal with conflict, the way you deal with difficult situations.
Well, conflict
you can't really always, you can't just extract, well, that's my life and then that's my work.
No, you can't. Well, these people who say I go to people often said to me, when I was away from work, did I ever switch off? And I went, never. But I used to just down dial it. And so I could turn the volume down, and then I knew when to turn it up. I went through 6 years once without, only one day in 6 years without getting a work phone call. So you've got to learn how to down. And I would do that by going walking in the mountains, and I would switch my phone off at the beginning of the walk, and 8 hours later, feeling so empowered and mindful of what I've just seen, I could turn it back on and deal with it. Because I realized if anything was that important that needed me over those 8 hours, I was a pretty poor boss. Because they'd probably not set up a good system. Because if you make the castle dependent on you being able to open the front door, you might be ill one day. So what's the system you set up, and what's the sexy word of them? What legacy do you leave? But I don't think it's a matter of what you leave. What legacy are you setting up as you're going, and how are you empowering others to lead themselves and within the organization? So I think you're right. The two are, your work becomes a different type of a family, but it's an extended family.
Yeah. I mean, our paths crossed in the midst of that. Those three main clubs you talk about. You worked with a number of organisations, but at Middlesbrough, and I shall never forget the day I'm on the bench at the training ground, the training centre, and Gareth sticks his head around the door, takes one look at me, thinks, "Who's this duffer I've just signed?" But you had a private practice which they enabled you to be able to run and take certain special cases, such as my own. I'd had reconstruction surgery on an ankle. And I think you may well have been tapping in, doing the acupuncture you were doing at the time, tapping in some nails into my ankle, which sounded horrendous, but didn't hurt as anything like you might think it did. In fact, I don't think there was any pain associated with it at all. But your reference point about, and I'm not a sport, I'm not in any way close to being elite or anything, I was just a jogger, for crying out loud. But my difficulty was I'd had rather an agricultural reconstruction surgery, which had left me in a situation where I was struggling to get back to flexibility and be able to move, and my ankle actually move in a way that would enable me to run. And the work that you did achieved that purpose. Now, for me, that was life-changing, because I could continue to do the Great North Run. I could continue to do the things that I always wanted to do. It kept me fit, kept me active. And that's so important and so essential. And you helped my daughter as well, who had a problem with her knee. And for me, those seem like little things. We all have aches and pains and bits and pieces that happen along the way. And I think if you ignore that, or if you overlook that, if you don't get the right advice, and you weren't in my position, which I consider to be very fortunate to talk to somebody with your experience, things could turn out very differently indeed. So from that point of view, publicly, very grateful. Thank you very much for that.
I think it's a pleasure, and I think I've always said it, to work in elite sports, a privilege you work very hard to achieve, and you want to achieve it, but never forget you've got skills that can help other people. One of my most recent patients in the Isle of Arran is an 83-year-old lady golfer, and who's had a shoulder replacement, 2 hip replacements, and got a bit of a sore knee, and it's an arthritic knee, but she's back playing golf.
Yeah.
And I think very quickly, I try and establish with certain patients, what are they coming to see me for? It might sound strange, but you can tell within about 5 minutes if a patient's going to get better, because they'll come to you and say, "I've come to see you. I'm desperately keen to help myself. What can I do?" If you get the patient who comes in and says, "You've got a sore back, I need you to manipulate it. What are you going to do for me?" They generally tend to not get better, because they're not prepared to take any responsibility for their desk at work, what car they drive, how they sleep, what do they eat. And I think, again, I've always never, I enjoy treating professional sportsmen for obvious reasons, because they're motivated to get better, but so are a lot of the public. And actually, I think it's a great grounding of yourself, when you live in a sports bubble. It is, I know they're in bubbles now, but I used to call it, you go to Manchester City's training ground, Middlesbrough, it's a bit like landing on Mars. It's different. And you have to realize, if you actually live there long enough, you'll think you've come from Mars. And I don't think I have come from Mars. So I think I always enjoyed seeing some private patients for the normality of it, because sport's not normal. It's a high performing circus full of performers who ultimately leave because they get too old at 35 maximum to play sport. There's nothing normal about that. And 99.99% of them don't make it.
Although Tom Brady must have some physiotherapist.
Absolutely, exactly.
Sure, you're not doing some work on the side for that guy.
Exactly.
How was he, 43, and he's made a Super Bowl? It's just
exactly phenomenal. And probably genetics helps. But listen, great luck, good luck to the guy. And again, but that's one of the nicest things about sport. it pushes human boundaries beyond, you take the 4-minute mile. You and I are too young to remember that, thankfully. However, at the time, no one thought it was possible. Now someone's running, someone's run a marathon in under 2 hours. What's next? And that's wonderful.
It's just mind-blowing, especially when you consider how long it took to do the Great North Road. We won't go there.
Exactly.
Grant, one of the things that I think really interesting, this career trajectory you had, the Manchester City role, I was not at all surprised to hear and see that you'd made that role, which was probably the biggest club in terms of its resources and its finances in the Premier League. Can you tell me a little bit about that role was when when you joined them? And
when I joined them, I had actually, Middlesbrough decided that I was on a Premier League salary and didn't want to carry on paying the wage I was on. They offered me a further contract on 50% less money, and I said, I'll think about it. And the answer was no, because I don't need to think about it. I would rather have done something else. I think you'd have ended up bitter. And there's no job. And then Manchester City employed a recruitment company to look at certain positions, and they approached me about a position that actually didn't interest me, which was with the first team. But I said, I'm looking at your academy setup, and that might be, because it'd be refreshing. So I went to Manchester City initially to be head of their what's called sports medicine department for their academy. And then 8 years later, I was leading their performance, which is basically looking after sports medicine and science, psychology, and performance analysis for the academy in the women's program. So I went from 3 staff to 34 staff in 7 years. And so therefore it became a leadership position and non-clinical. And I thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity. I'd always led at Middlesbrough when I was at Rangers, but I was also a clinician, which meant I was a practicing physio. At City, I was afforded the right not to, because, and again, I think you then learn what is different between management and leadership. And what you learn too is what a club's paying you for is not to be a physio. They're paying you to make a strategic direction on the overall direction of what the departments are running. So it's very different, but I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Yeah, excellent. And then obviously in a situation where you've got a little bit more freedom now, you can actually call the shots and actually pick and choose the clients that you work with. Yeah. You've got practice on our end.
I've got a very small private practice. I only treat about 6 or 8 people a week maximum, but I mentor about 15 people I mentor privately in sport and business who just want someone to help them develop soft skills. And because I think still maintain the best practitioners are not always the best technically, but they're the best who've got a very good set of skills that way, but they've also some soft skills. So I work a lot on things like you talked about, conflict management, on communication, understanding yourself. And so I do a little bit of that, and I'm a critical friend to 5 sporting organisations around the world where we phone in and we have discussions about current problems, or also analysing. We don't do this very well in business or sport. We forget to not so much praise ourselves, but we forget to value what's good practice. And before I also value what's not going well, I like to know what's going well, and we make notes of it. Yeah. And usually that outweighs what's not going well.
Quite right. We're going to get into the heart of today's podcast, which is going to be looking at the business scenarios and situations and how your experience can help to understand how to improve, be better than to encompass and engage with some of these situations we find ourselves in. And because I've heard you talk before, and there are some fantastic insights that you have. But before we do that, there's one thing that I would like to do. This sounds a bit odd because quite often people leave this to the end, but I'd quite like to do it now, which is to give people an opportunity to, if they wanted to find out a bit more about Grant Downie, how would they find you?
Yeah, best thing probably to do is just look at my website. I've got a website, www.grantdowney.co.uk, and that's got my story, it's got my type of profiling, it's got all of the sort of webinars and things I do. There's a resource section. It's all free. I don't charge people to use it because most of that I've gathered from other people who've not charged me, so I don't really want to make money off it. I've got no need to. So it's all there, and there's a contact form there. If people want to contact me with an individual question, they can do. And again, I learned a lesson early on in my career. I try and reply to everybody, because even if it's just a small request or a call, it can help people. And I, from an 11-year-old boy who couldn't read or write because I was badly dyslexic, had to go to a different school to be taught. I was inspired by a teacher who taught me, and they taught me the gift of helping others. And I'll carry on doing that till the day I die.
you're yet another example of somebody that's overcome adversity through something like dyslexia to become
exactly. And you don't suddenly become a good reader or writer. You just improve. But what you learn, and it probably took me 45 years to be comfortable with. And I can remember I was speaking at a conference in South Africa, and I'm a pretty confident public speaker. I enjoy it. I get quite a little buzz from it. But if you present to me, could I read the fire instructions out a minute before a talk, I'd probably have a panic attack, because I can't read like that. And I can remember someone coming to me saying, could you just do this? And I went, no, that's not my skill. Do you mind just doing it yourself? It took me about 45 years, realized that's okay. We're all, and I think again, as a leader, if you're prepared to show other people your vulnerabilities, but how you overcome them, I think you gain a certain amount of psychological safety within that team. It's all right not to be all right at times, and no one's good at everything.
Yeah, give yourself a bit of a break. Talking of breaks, looking now at those items that we talked about, we've got 5 topics that we're going to cover. I'm just going to go straight into the first one, actually, rather than just read a list. We've got the show notes. I would say as well, in the show notes, we'll have full details of how you can contact Grant, and if you like, follow him on Twitter or connect with him on LinkedIn, or obviously visit the website and see the content that he's talked about. But for today, we want to cover 5 areas, and the one that I think is very topical, and you won't be surprised to hear me talk about it, is crisis management. And there's no doubting that in every sporting organisation, at some point during a season, during a particular cup run or whatever, there's a crisis. Something needs to be handled. Nobody could really have envisaged the scale of something like a pandemic to try and cope with. But what lessons would you say you've learnt within the sporting world to be able to help businesses who are dealing with this current situation?
I think one of the things we do, I think, pretty well in sport is we prepare for what ifs. And what we do for them, we do them when the what if hasn't occurred. And so therefore it's almost, we train our minds to realize we're going to at times face a situation where we've got no centre half. Well, what do we do? Well, actually, he could play in that position. He could do it. His injury is not going to suddenly get better. He might be able to. So you then bring in a strategy, but you have a process to deal with it. You don't get overly emotional. And I think, again, what you then do is also, but when you've had the events, afterwards, what we do well is we do what we call significant event analysis, where we work out, well, why did we get into that situation? What were the circumstances? Were they avoidable? They may not have been. Could we do anything about it? And what would we do differently? And we record it. And as a result of it, then when we get to the next stage, this is what we did. And I can remember Walter Smith, an old manager I worked with when I was at Rangers, was a wonderful man and a very logical thinker. And he used to say to me, and he at the beginning of the season would put his 11 best players in a team sheet and put it in his top drawer. They'd never look at it. And when we were in a crisis, he would do the draw, look at it, and think, those are the players I must pick if they're fit. Because when I was being logical, they were the ones. And I think it's having that ability to try and keep calm in a crisis. Get inside your heart's beating, so let's not pretend you're not. But actually, it's having a process that allows you to go back to and be brave and undertake it and stick with them. And sometimes stick with the plan, but also be brave enough to change the plan.
And I think there has been an element of panic that we've seen right from the top, dare I say.
Exactly.
All the way through, and that just does not help in anybody's mindset, because we're all feeling a certain level of anxiety here.
Absolutely.
And if people in charge are not in charge, then that's really not.
And I think it's all right to feel not that comfortable at the moment, and it's all right to be like that. So it's fine. And I think by saying that, it just helps. I'm feeling a bit stressed. Well, you probably should be. It's normal. And in sport, people think people go out and perform in front of 70,000 people and players don't get. I've seen players throwing up before big games. I've seen 1 or 2, sadly, panic attacks before they've got to go out and perform, and yet they go out and then perform. So it's
part of their process.
It's part of their process, and it's understanding that we all have a different process, but actually let's cater for what ifs. And you're right, no one could cater for a pandemic like we're going through now, but the process of how you deal with it, you could deal with.
And knowing the players you've got on the pitch.
Absolutely.
And looking at what resources you've got. I mean, a lot of those decisions, interestingly, would have been taken with things like furlough.
Mhm.
You know, which players do are the absolute, you know, we must have. I mean, it sounds quite harsh, but if you're
Absolutely.
running a business, you need to make sure that you've got a core number of players who are able to be able to
Absolutely.
sustain that business going forward.
Exactly.
And if there's an opportunity with a facility like furlough, then you can engage still with those people who are perhaps on their way to becoming those top
Exactly.
players, but are not quite there just yet.
Exactly. It's not easy, but I think again it comes back to dealing with human beings, and again we all are uniquely different. So you can have your processes, but actually the interpretation of them will be uniquely different, and where people are in their career. Because if, again, like myself, it's okay for me to talk about, you know, the pandemic has not affected me financially. It has. I've taken quite a big financial hit, but it doesn't affect me. Whereas if I was, you know, younger, had 2 children and a big mortgage, that would affect me massively.
Yeah. I mean, publicly we've had the founder, one of the founders, co-founders of the group called Excluded, and currently supporting all businesses, entrepreneurs, freelancers, contractors, people who've come the wrong end of not getting anything from furlough. There are 3 million people, and right now there's a lot of fingers crossed, hoping we're on the cusp of a March announcement that might allow them something. I'm one of those. So as a sort of an interim consultant, my part of my income was PAYE, part of my income was through consultancy. Somehow I fell through the gaps, so there was no funding for me. But I'm similar to you in a financial position where it's not been quite so bad for me. So what I do is try and help some of those others who are really facing some of the great realities. And it's about balance, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in crisis management, we're looking at the what ifs, the process, and the resilience. And in leadership, a critical thing as well at this time is strong leadership. And how do we get the right mindset for that?
I think strong leadership and the right leadership team around you. And I think strong leaders will appoint even stronger sub-leaders at times too in their area, and allow the experts. So for example, you know, if someone's wanting to really know the scientific information regarding this pandemic, I wouldn't listen to Boris Johnson. I'd listen to the scientific expert. You know, so you were, and so I think, and so the mindset must be comfortable in what you know, but be very comfortable in what you don't know, and ensure. So I used to ensure. So, for example, in the sporting context, I know I'm sort of I would call myself a contained optimist, which means I'm pretty level when we win, I'm pretty level when we lose, but I like to go for things. Yeah. So I'm pretty brave. So if I was a mouse and there's a bit of cheese in the corner, I'm just going to go and eat it. Whereas I like a cat. I might have someone who might see a cat beside me. So I need someone beside me who's a bit more prudent than me, a bit slower. So in car terms, I'm the accelerator. I want to brake. And I think a good leader will realize what they're not. And actually what's in your, as we call it, from a sort of a spotlight profiling perspective, we would call it what's in your empty chair, what's not there. Yeah. So when you're going to make a decision, you need people around you who are maybe going to say, why are you going to do that? Is it really going to happen? Rather than, yes, boss, you're right, boss, 3 bags full, boss. You know, don't surround yourself. I always used to say that, don't surround yourself by people who think the way you do.
Yeah, I think we saw, touching on the politics again, but I think we've seen a little bit of that in America.
Yeah, absolutely.
With somebody who had a strong personality and was very keen to surround themselves with people who did not disagree with their viewpoint.
Exactly.
It doesn't work. We know how that ended.
Exactly. Say no more.
But just as an example, but I agree with you, because I think having held the position of CEO for a number of years for a professional services business, and my profession was marketing.
Yeah.
So that's a bit strange. So you're going to put a marketing person in charge of all sorts of things, and being self-aware and realizing that actually, well, fortunately, I was surrounded by lawyers, very good lawyers. So there's a lot of compliance and detail there. I had to really teach myself how to apply the attention to detail element of the role, because if you don't get the compliance piece right as a law firm, you end up being taken off by the SFR. So you need to be quite cool on that. But yeah, having the right team around you is so important. The importance of physical fitness. I think this is one that I've heard a couple of people talk on, and we've had lots of references to people staying fit through lockdown and generally looking after themselves. We have a massive problem in this country with obesity, of people being overweight or just not exercising or being fit enough. And when we look on the TVs and we look at the sort of organisations that you work with, and the sportsmen are all obviously have to be fit. That's a given. You know, you've got to be able to run backwards and forwards and look at the stats. You know, you've done the equivalent of 15k or 20k in that particular match or further. You know, those are the things that you know, you almost as a when you're witnessing that, you think nothing of it. You think, well, that's what they should be doing. And then you sit down in your sort of rather sort of sedentary way and do your job. And for the past 10, 11 months or whatever it's been, you're doing that in front of a screen. You're not doing any activity. There's like you separate yourself from that idea, that ethos of being a sportsman. I think you might be able to help us to think, well, maybe we should be thinking differently.
I think I wouldn't think about physical fitness. I would think about physical, mental, and emotional fitness.
Okay.
And I think it's a broader thing that there are some people who are physically very fit but mentally very unfit, and so therefore they're not that valuable to the organization. And I think it's about a balance, and it's not, again, a balance isn't a straight line. I keep saying to people, balance in sports like that, you've got to learn how to ride that, you know, and in most, you know, high profession jobs it's like that. But actually what gives you back is sometimes, so I practice mindfulness, but I don't do yoga. I don't sit in front of a nice dripping tap and listen to music. I actually go and take pictures of wildlife. I go for walks. I just like space for myself to think. I like physical exercise too. And I think it's important for companies. And I think the best modern companies will actually have a policy of nutrition. So they may provide breakfast for their workers. They may provide something at lunchtime, but it should be nutritious and healthy. They should encourage activity of physical well-being, but it could go from walking to fitness classes to maybe some activities at weekends. And I genuinely think you'll get more out of people by keeping them fit physically, mentally, and emotionally, and allowing them to connect the three. Because, you know, we often think injuries come on when players have or professional sportsmen have been playing too much physically. You know, players don't get that tired physically. They get tired mentally and emotionally from coming into the same work every day, missing their family, maybe the death of it. You know, you often find that footballers, generally, a lot of males, when they get married, they have the first child, they often pick up an injury because they're not sleeping as well. The physical stats are no different.
Yeah.
The sleeping patterns have been changed. So being aware of the fact that someone in your office may have just, you know, they've gone through a difficult time, or it's a female, she's been off on maternity leave, she's come back to work. Now, if you go off your work for 3 months and come back to work, it's a bit of a scary place. Do we allow that adaptation? And
what
so
happens, you know, FOMO, you know, something's happened, I haven't been part of it, I'm not part of the gang anymore.
Exactly. You know, so I think, so I would expand physical to be mental and emotional, but you should have people who are understanding that, listening to the people. But as the thing that creates often the best way for that is feeding them correctly. And I would far rather people maybe got paid £1,000 a year less or and you provide them with food, the right food, than pay them that extra money and they go and drink Coca-Cola and a fag at lunchtime.
Yes, exactly. Just don't look at my Instagram account and see what I'm cooking every day. I try and be healthy. I say my son's 22 today, and it's his birthday, and his choice is burgers. So we are going to do that, but we do eat.
You can do them healthy. You can do them
occasionally, yeah. So it's a bit of a treat. That's really good. And again, I did phrase the question on that one on physical fitness, but you're spot on. You know, it's the holistic approach, which again is a phrase that is overused, I think, but we are looking at emotional and mental, well, the mental approach, which leads into the emotional side of things. Yeah. To be good, because
I think they're all linked together, and I think we separate them badly because objectively we can measure the physical, so we think that's a barometer, but it's not. The other two, what we can't measure, are probably more important, and we've got to be comfortable with that. But you can sense that if you've got emotional intelligence.
If you think about it in terms of the journey that people follow sometimes when they go on a weight loss program, or they appreciate that they're carrying too much weight, they try to lose it, they go on a program and they start to lose the weight, they start to build the confidence. The confidence leads to a better, more outgoing approach. They tend to be engaging, they tend to want to take on occasional risks, or to do things in a much more balanced way. And you know, they're a better person for a result of it, rather than being somebody that's just feeling quite bad about themselves.
Exactly.
And people liking that, I suppose, the confidence of a striker that's just off it at the moment and put the ball in the net. Exactly. I've got something going off here. Would you believe it's my daughter is ringing me? Hang on a second, we're going to take this live. Oh no, she's gone. Sorry about that, Grant.
No problem.
We'll deal with that in the edit. As far as the fourth item,
Yeah.
physical fitness, again, we've seen this for a lot of businesses who have tried to adapt to the situation they find themselves in now. And again, a word that seems to have emerged is pivot, or repurpose themselves. And I think individuals as well have had time to reflect and think about what they're doing with their lives, or would like to have had that thought, this is a good opportunity for me too. Perhaps haven't done it. Have you, in what you talked about there with physical fitness and being elite sport, and age 35 is pretty much what assistance is given, if any, to players who get to that age where it's things
listen, there's a lot of exit strategies in place for footballers now, and it's difficult. You know, it's a bit like being in the army or the navy. When you leave it, you know, civil life is different, but this is the same for staff as well as players. But there is assistance to help them, and I keep saying it's about understanding from a very young age. I often used to tell parents, you know, your son is 14, but he'll never be a footballer forever. One day he's going to have to do something different. So let's start sowing the seeds early, and let's start preparing them for a different type of life. Do all of them adapt easily? No, they don't. That's why quite a number of there's slightly more higher alcoholics in ex-sportsmen and gamblers, but that's partly because of their personalities, and they live on that edge too. I think it's important, the industry, and it's really attempting a lot to help them retrain. The PFA, the Premier League, do a lot of work with the young players and the more senior players. And a lot of people think, well, you know, it's going to be straightforward. They've got choices, some of them, and we all look at the top players, and the top players do earn vast sums of money. But if you're playing for Hartlepool Rovers, you know, you will need another career to live. You know, so I think it's important we, from a very young age, sell that. You know, you are a footballer, but one day you won't. And I think it's important to talk in that type of language, but not let them spoil that part of their journey, because you know, you want them to go and achieve as much as they can, but realizing when it's over, and it's over pretty sharp. And so, you know, sport is ruthless. I often say it's compassionately ruthless. And as long as we can have compassion with the ruthlessness, it can go together. It's when we don't have the compassion, it's like, well, they're finished, who's next? And I used to, again, often in board meetings, we would have players with shirts on, and it would be, this player is worth X 10 million pounds. And I used to have a little sticker by the head saying, this bit's priceless.
Yeah.
You know, and I think if you can remember that, they are asset value to the club, but the person's priceless. And you have to come back to that person at times. And I think the organisations all round, if you think of duty of care, you know, the Ministry of Culture and Sport is really looking into this, and I've sat in a couple of committees for it. And I think we have a duty to care, but it's not just for the players. You think of some of the staff who've been institutionalised, you know, for 30 years. You know, if you think about it, for 30 years, I went to work every day and got a breakfast, lunch and evening meal free if I wanted. Where'd you get that in life? It's not normal. You know, so say thank you and appreciate it. And don't take it for granted.
And in a commercial world, we don't really do that. We might have a situation, and I came across it in the professional services field, with partners who had been, if you like, being the goal scorers. They'd been making it all happen for the firm, and they were really, really important, but then decided they were going to retire. And then they were thinking, well, actually, it's succession. Now, in a sporting environment, there is a constant
succession plan. We work on succession planning all the time.
All the time. And I think
companies should do. I think companies should too, because I think, as you say, what are you trying to replace? And I think there's a danger if someone's leaving the organization and someone tells me he or she is irreplaceable, the company's done something wrong. It shouldn't be.
That's a problem. Yeah.
It's a problem. It's a problem. And you should recognize that early. Well, what skill set has that person got? How are we going to replace it? And, you know, you don't replace a Cristiano Ronaldo at Manchester United, but you bring in a different system that still gets the same end product. So it's irrelevant of the person, because he won as much as when he left and he was there. So he was replaceable, and so therefore it's not about the individual, it's about the company. And I think, and again, I remember when I got one of my external critical friends to look at the program I'd set up at Manchester City after 3 years. He went, it's a great system, Grant, but if you're run over by a bus tomorrow, certain things will fail. And that was the best bit of advice I got, because it made me realize, set these systems up that actually are probably better when I'm there, but I'm not there, they still run.
Do players get any, I mean, you talked about the advice and guidance and structure that is involved, but do they have any help in sort of the life plan?
Yes, listen, clubs have lifestyle officers in the academies. Yeah, they all do. They all have life, and therefore it's planning. You have educational officers. First team, it's less, but they can still get that support through the PFA, both men and women. It's all there if they want it.
Because I think we all need that.
Absolutely.
You've talked brilliantly about the fact that, you had this idea that where you wanted to be at a certain stage, and you've arrived. You're relatively, I'm going to say this because we're not a million miles away from an age. You're a young man.
Absolutely, very young. At heart.
And you've got an idyllic lifestyle on the Isle of Arran, doing what you want to do, and with a lifestyle that adapts and is suited to what you want to do with your partners. It's fantastic. Did you build a house as well?
I got it built. I would love to say I built it. I'd be completely lying. I got it. I planned it. I did the architect. Well, I got an architect to draw it up, obviously, but I did the plans. But I think it's important to have that dream and not forget it. And some people never get to achieve it in life because of health. Some people die young, and I think it's a privilege. And you should never forget that, to be able to say that. But you've also got to, I'm not a multimillionaire. Let's be totally honest. There's people, young footballers, much, but actually, how much money do you need to live, and what makes you happy? Now, I'm happy now taking pictures, playing an odd game of bad golf, having time to do this sort of thing, helping people do things. And having a way of life where I can take a deep breath in. And I think, again, I remember, was it 18 months ago, I was in the Middle East doing a recruitment for a company who were desperate for a head of sports medicine. And a typical Middle East person told me at the end of it, Grant, you've done the great recruitment, but we don't want them. We want you to do the job, and we will pay you whatever you want to stay here. And I went, it's very kind of you, but no, thank you. And he went, yes, but tell me your dream. And I went, well, my dream is to build a house in Arran and go and live there. Well, we can help you. I said, you can't. I'm already doing it.
Yeah,
because your money's going to stop me doing it.
Yeah,
and I think
money. It's almost that mentality of money talks for everything. They own you.
Yeah, exactly. And he would have bought me, and they would have paid me a very handsome salary, and it would have been a nice salary. And at 25, I'm sure I'd have said yes. At 57 at the time, already in a position that I could. And so this is where you have to be very careful when you're talking about things that affect you and don't. The context in my life is I'm at this stage. And I remember once someone saying to me, in my latter year at Manchester City, Grant, as a leader, you're quite relaxed, you're quite contained. You seem to be able to make pretty good balanced decisions. I went, well, you should have seen me 20 years ago, because I couldn't then. And I think it's important they see you as you are then. They haven't seen your journey. They haven't seen the fact that you did make a lot of mistakes. You have. But actually, I was a quick learner. Yeah. So I wouldn't say I never made the same mistake twice, but I rarely did, because I was self-analytical enough to look in the pond first, and the reflection told me what I got wrong. I wasn't necessarily going to blame someone else for what went wrong.
No, I mean, for me, the idea that the prospect of being in a position where you can have the core of what you want to achieve. I mean, I'm trying to think how old I might have been, about 25. I went on a course an ad agency had run, and it wasn't exactly what I was expecting it to be, but I ended up writing down the things that I wanted to achieve in my life, and it was about self-motivation, self-focus, and I put it away somewhere. And when we moved house recently, and I dug this piece, I hadn't looked at it for over 25 years. And I went through it, it was quite incredible, the things that actually had arrived, even though and people talk about this and write it down and it will happen. But bizarrely, those things had come to pass in a way. And I suppose subliminally, somewhere imprinted in my brain was this dream of the things that I wanted to do. And it was very much around the family, very much around, having holidays, being able to support them, being able to look after them, seeing them through their education, and I mean, there was the odd have a nice car in there as well, and things like that. And
that's allowed. It's right.
Material elements, but overall, I suppose if you had to write one word that sums it all up, it was happy. It was being focused and happy, and I think that's something that if we are so driven to try and achieve the financial element of it, we look back and we say, actually, yes, I might have achieved that, but I'm miserable.
I think I also remember a number of years ago, I took a player before I came to Middlesbrough with Rangers, and we'd gone to America for knee surgery, or he'd gone for knee surgery, and I'd taken him with him, and we were passing an expensive jeweler shop, And he just went, come on, let's go inside. I want to buy a watch. And he went in and he was looking at a watch. And let's put it this way, he's about to buy a Rolex, or I think it was probably $30,000+ in excess, and could quite easily afford to buy it. It wasn't a lot of money for him. And I just said to him, do me a favor, give me a credit card. We're here for 10 days. We're going to walk past the shop in 9 days' time. If you want it, you can buy it. Okay, then. We walked past the shop and he was straight past it. I went, do you want your credit card back? He said, what for? You wanted to buy a watch? He said, I don't need a watch. So why did you want to buy it? He said, I thought it'd make me happy. Would it really make you happy? And I think, sometimes you do. Listen, there's nothing nicer than buying that new car when you've worked so hard to achieve it. But probably the next day, most of that happiness is gone.
Yeah.
And actually, as you said it, will you forget that first summer holiday you took your daughter to do X, Y, and Z? Or we were talking about it before about your daughter when I treated her most memorable moment was the fact I gave her carrot cake for being a great patient because she actually did well. And she remembers the carrot cake.
Yeah. And she remembers, of course,
but those are the things that are important in life. We sometimes get hung up and don't get me wrong, you need money to live, and you want to have a nice lifestyle. I've got a nice lifestyle. I'm not pretending otherwise, but I've worked very hard to achieve that. And now what I want to do is actually gain the benefit of it, where I'm still hopefully not just young enough, it's healthy enough too, and it's finding that balance because. Working in elite sport is often 7 days a week. And so therefore me at 58, I've probably done more days work than most 65-year-olds. Yeah. And that takes a price on you. I feel it physically now.
Yeah. And I think looking at that level of input and energy that has to be put into a role or any job, any profession that we might have, throws at the question of, and you'd like to reflect and say that you've been consistent. I could say, well, I'll try and be consistent, but we know we like this. It's
absolutely
a roller coaster of energy and external factors, and something's happened that's thrown a spanner in the works. But in sporting terms, it's all about consistency.
Absolutely.
If you're the Chelsea manager and you haven't achieved in the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games, whatever it is, then the chances are you're going to find yourself in a job. It's unfortunately,
and again, the compassionate reality of the industry.
Yeah,
that's reality. And so therefore don't complain when you sign the 4-year contract that says when you get sacked after that run you get a year's salary and you've got an extra 6 million in the bank. It's the consequence of the job.
But taking that into scaling it down to most SMEs or businesses that are trying to achieve things right now, and actually maybe look at other organizations as well. One of my experiences through lockdown has been in moving home. We had a lot of calls to make to tell people about change of addresses. And talking about consistency, you'd have one financial organization that would literally have everything you needed to do on their app done. You'd have another organization where they had a call center and they had people working from home with disparate systems that weren't connected, and it would take an inordinate length of time and in fact failed to deliver what you wanted to do after you'd spent 2 hours, if I had hair, pulling it out, trying to get what I wanted to get. And that's an example of an inconsistency
absolutely.
on what really should have been quite a simple, straightforward thing. So how can businesses learn from what is a driven element of elite sport is to be consistent? What might they learn?
I think you have to be ruthless and ruthless from the point of view of really define what are the processes that work, and again, record them, analyze the ones that don't and why, and change why. If you then apply the same process of something that has failed, what did Einstein call that? Definition of insanity. Expecting a different outcome. It's not. It's going to, and that's what leaders do. You should be there to be the question. Well, we did that one really well, but could we do it better? Why would we do it again? Why would we expect that? And set up little teams that can, some people talk about consistency and marginal gains together. I think the marginal gains is a bit of a misconception. I think British Cycling came up with that because they were doing 99% right, and they wanted you to focus on the 1% they were just fiddling about with. And so there's no point doing the first bit if you don't do the second. So the marginal gains bit comes into consistency, but only if consistently, I said it to someone once.
You've got the model there, and it's right.
It's not the model, exactly right. So therefore, the model that's right to me, if I was to say to you, the answer is on one stone on that beach in Arran, but there's 25 of them, you've got to turn all of them over, and elite sportsman will. And if he doesn't see it, he'll do it again, and he'll do it again. And I think you have to have that ruthlessness to want to achieve it. And you've got to have that vision. And you've got to be the person pushing that rocket towards it. But inside it, everyone else is driving it.
Yeah. That's excellent. I love that. I really love that. Well, we whipped through our 5. I'm just going to try and sum up and point and tell me if I get any of this wrong. I'm trying to remember the way we were with this crisis management in sport, and the way that we're handling things for ourselves is about really trying to look at the what ifs. Break down the process and try and think about disaster scenarios, even though it's, we've had one. It's probably everybody thinking about that right now, but consider who you've got and who you've got within that around you. The leadership approach, and you talked about empty chairs, and being the leader doesn't necessarily mean that you do all of the roles to achieve the outcome. Absolutely. You have to make sure that you know where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. Make sure the people that are in the room that can fill those gaps in your abilities, and unplug your ego. I guess we'll add to that as well. Not try and drive that one. The importance of physical fitness. You picked out on that it was the wrong question. We should really be thinking about the whole picture, physical, mental, and emotional. And look at an all round, and within that, a nutritional element to make sure
you're
getting the right nutrients to be able to achieve what they want to achieve. Repurposing and looking at goals. Well, we all need a life plan. That's what this is telling us. We need something that is going to pull all of our abilities and our intentions and our goals and what we want to do, but actually have an achievable, reasonable plan that we can achieve over an amount of time. Maybe it's broken down over what we want to achieve this next 12 months, the next 5 years. Have a plan and give yourself something to work towards, because then I suppose it gives you focus. And without that, we're a bit flotsam and jetsam, aren't we? We're a bit sort of...
And a plan that's got flexible sides, it can change. And evolve.
And on the consistency and marginal gains, bang on the money with looking at, marginal gains is the sort of the glacé on the cherry on the icing on the cake. It's the very top piece. So really what you need to do is make sure, let's get this model, this structure right first. Let's make sure that what we want to achieve is the right way to approach it before we then start looking at the other elements they're going to set us apart from everybody else.
Absolutely. Well summed up.
I'm sorry, yes.
No, it is.
Look at a bark. I get the okay from Grant. I mean, it's brilliant. I mean, I think you've really offered an insight there to the way in which the sporting world copes with certain issues and problems and scenarios, but actually it resonates so strongly with what we're trying to do in the business world as well, as it should, I guess. Just a question I've got. There's an awful lot of discussion at this time about well-being, about different techniques and trends and things that people should be doing for themselves. An awful lot of chat about mental health as well as comes a big factor, especially in what we're suffering right now with the pandemic. What are your views on, this is a big question, I know, and apologies for this one, but what are your views on the well-being industry and what it brings to business? What should businesses be thinking about? Do they engage in a program, just pick one off a shelf, or how should they go about it?
I think they should actually engage with their staff first. Ask the staff what they want. Because again, so well-being for me is like mindfulness for me is walking up a mountain on my own, taking pictures, but not everyone wants to do that. So there's no point saying, let's go all on a mountain trek, because half the folk might not want to do it. Again, engage with your staff, ask them. And sometimes it can be various, from fitness work, it could be to yoga, offering subsidized, maybe soft tissue massage, that type of thing. It could be bringing in guest speakers. But I actually would ask your workforce. I'm a great believer, rather than decide for them, ask them. They might have a better idea than I've ever had. And I think I'm a great believer. And again, ask the employee, if your company listens to you and acts on it, you feel involved. So therefore, choosing a charity to give to, which is one of yours, is much more enjoyable than sometimes just choosing a charity.
Absolutely right. I've been there. I've absolutely been there. Even sometimes when they create a committee to come up with these ideas, people still feel disengaged if that committee isn't inclusive.
Exactly.
Drawn on ideas from...
Exactly. Exactly.
So yeah, I think you're spot on with that. Just final one for you, Grant, and we'll let your good self go. What would you say is the best piece of advice you've had in your career?
Best bit of advice: don't be frightened to make a mistake. Do it, and sometimes, people are hesitant and what ifs. No, sometimes you've got to go for it. And I think, again, at times it doesn't mean you're not scared, you don't have fear, but the courage is overcoming that. And I think courageous people will make decisions, but you will get it wrong. But don't be frightened, and also don't hide that mistake. I'm a great believer in sharing that mistake with other people, because they might not make that mistake. They may be empowered by the fact you in a strong position of admitting you can get things wrong, and that will empower them to be a better person, lead a better life. And if that's the case, I'm happy.
You're absolutely, I'm aligned 100% with that view. The second job I ever had was working in a large travel organisation. It was sadly no longer with us. But I learned an awful lot in that company, and not least of which, I had an interesting boss, shall we say, and there was a lot of pressure on a lot of people, and I came in and thinking, why is everybody seemed very contained and quite anxious. And a guy I realised what it was, I think about week 2, when he turned around and he said, David, you need to be careful. I said, what's the matter? He said, you keep admitting when you get something wrong. It's like, well, that's the way I am, because everybody was running around trying to sort of like cover themselves and get other people. And that's not a culture.
No,
that's not reflective of the organisation, I will say that. It was a reflection of the way that particular section was being managed, and it quickly got changed. Not least of which I didn't stick around too long. But that for me is such a negative, a toxic environment to be in. The more open and the more clear we can be about our own failings, people warm to that, because they're human.
Exactly. We're all human, and we should never, and we all have fallibilities and worries. And so therefore, to me, it is something I know a number of young people who I've worked with have expressed to me, that we love the fact that when you tell us stories of things you got wrong in the past.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's a lesson learned.
Exactly.
And it gives them a license to be able to do the same thing.
Exactly.
Grant, this has been a fantastic talk. I could carry on
the
conversation way beyond the rest of the day, but I appreciate you've got a lot to do today and this week, and your time is precious, and it's been fabulous. Thank you very much. As I've mentioned to the audience already, we know where to find you on your site, grantdownie.co.uk. Please look him up. He's a top man. Thank you very much, Grant.
David, thank you very much indeed for inviting me.
You're welcome.